Life is changing in so many ways. I don't know who to trust anymore. There's a shadow.
Here's another reading from In a Shallow Grave by James Purdy, starting on page 33. It's like I disremember Quintus ever coming on that PM. Though, but of course, he come, and was to come and go again, and was regular about a lot of things, but he didn't have to come in a way, because somebody else did. Oh, there were other applicants, too. I can't begin to remember all of them, though I have wrote their names down on a slip of paper I keep in the family Bible, but none of them was right. And Quintus, too, might have been too right. But you see, the other person came, and that's the occasion of me writing down on slip by slip of paper this diary in my mind. Let me try to say it like this. I thought he was a will-o'-the-wisp when I first laid eyes on him, for we have plenty of them here in the early summer. I'd gone to let the goats sleep in one of the little sheds we used to have for sheep in the winter. The goats were making a fuss, I guess, at their strange surroundings, and I paused after having locked them in, and I looked out toward the ocean, which was still as flat sand. And I saw this motionless something that looked like a light, about maybe to go out. "Who is that?" I said to this appearance, which was now leaning on the pine tree as I spoke. "What are you about?" No answer. I didn't need any sign about warning trespassers on my land, because I was dreaded more than 100 riflemen. Had my appearance scared the daylights out of whoever was leaning against that tree? I walked slowly over to the sloping ground, to the hemlock tree. There he was, the trespasser, and staring at me with his open blue eyes, with his hair even lighter than mine, and a face that was most winsome, except he had, as I was later to understand, no front teeth, which only made him somehow more agreeable, at least younger looking. "Are you an applicant?" I inquired at last, as he merely stared in my direction. "Go away," the trespasser finally spoke, and a moment later, "Can't you leave me be, mister?" "Go away, huh?" I chewed my eye. "Do you realize you're on my property?" "I'll get in a minute. Give me a chance to catch my breath." Just then he slipped and fell to one knee, and I instinctively reached down and lifted him up. And then he caught a full view of my face as I was bending over him, and he let out a yell of horror. Before I knew what I had done, I'd struck him. And I don't think I have ever struck a man before, except in self-defense in all my life. And I mean, I really struck him, for the blow brought the blood. He kept wiping off the blood and looking at it on his fingers, and paid no attention to my many apologies of, "I'm heartfelt sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't know what come over me." Just then, the smallest of the young goats, which had escaped from the shed where I had put them, come wandering out and crying. The trespasser stooped down and began petting it. "Well, what do you aim to do?" I questioned him at last, my anger sort of returning. "You can't just stand here. Tell you what, I'll invite you in, even though you say you ain't an applicant." He paid me no attention, absorbed in his attentions with the kid. Disgusted with him and his having made me lose control of myself, I said, "To hell with you, then!" and went inside. I got all wrapped up in a bit, and taking apart an old hall clock that had belonged to my grandfather, and forgot all about the incident in the pine grove. I don't know how much time had slipped by, but I know it was dark, black dark out. I looked up from my sitting room, where I was fixing the tiny wires of the clock, and seen the trespasser standing at the kitchen screen door, still holding the kid in his arms. We stared at one another through that long expanse of rooms, as if he was looking at me from the entrance of the world to come. Suddenly he reached to open the screen door and came inside with the goat. "You can't bring no animal in here," I spoke sharply. He paid no mind and sat down at the smallest kitchen chair with the kid in his lap. It had gone to sleep under his bedding. I came rushing then into the kitchen. "You have a most irksome way of not answering questions," I said. "I asked you if you was an applicant, and you didn't deign to answer." "I ain't an applicant," he replied saucily through his missing front teeth. "Where are you from, and what do you want?" "Utah," he said after a deliberate hesitation. Then for the first time he looked me straight in the face with his merciless, wide-open sky-blue eyes. And then, making a terrible sound, dropping the goat, he retched fearfully, bending down, trying desperately to vomit, but nothing coming up but a few strands of phlegm and water. I left the kitchen and stumbled into the big front sitting room and sat down under the old floor lamp with a shade decorated with tassels. I often played with these tassels when I was upset, but I was too upset now even to have the strength to touch one. In fact, I felt then I was going to die. I felt again somehow like I had the day I and my buddies was all exploded together when we rose into the air like birds and then fell to the erupting earth and the flames and the screams of aircraft and sirens and men calling through the punctured bowels and brains. My face was bathed in a film like tears, but it wasn't tears. It was the sweat of death. My back was to the kitchen, you see, so I hardly noticed this hand on the back of my neck. It was a warm, soft hand, not unlike the goat. It moved gently on the nape of my neck. And after it seemed I had gone to sleep, I heard his sort of hillbilly, sort of goat voice inquiring, "You was talking about an applicant?" "What of it?" I cried, taking hold of his hand and throwing it off me like you would a beetle that had crawled on you. "Well," he said, putting his hand back on my neck, "I wonder what an applicant did." I reeled around then and looked at him, for I had decided all of a sudden he was some runaway from the law. "What would I want with an applicant who pukes when he looks at me, huh?" I shouted at him, beginning to rave. "A fucking little trespasser who feels he must puke and maybe shit when he sees my face. Get out! Get out of my house and off my property, you little crud!" He only looked at me then with his questioning sky-open eyes. "What are the duties of this applicant?" he wondered, quiet as a spring zephyr. My anger simmered down as I studied his eyes and the vacant space of his missing teeth. "What does he do?" I repeated after him as if he had put me under a quieting draught, like the doc used to hand me in a little paraffin cup full of something red and drowsy. "Why, what does an applicant do?" I said, staring at him like I had just awoke in the hospital, and the nurse stood there and said, "You're better, Garnet." "Can you bear messages?" I began cautiously with the most important duty. "That is, deliver and fetch letters from down the road." "I don't see why not," he contested. "I reckon you're too good, being white to rub feet." "Oh, I could take a try at that," he said, looking down at my shoes. "What size shoe do you wear?" he wondered. I swallowed hard and then replied, 13. "It's a lot of rubbing. That's a lot of rubbing," he remarked, and suddenly we both laughed. He avoided looking at my face still, and I don't suppose anybody ever got any pleasure looking at it, but, of course, once the girls in school had liked to gaze at me and flirt. That's no exaggeration either. I once was able to put a crush on all the girls. Well, that was like an age ago, if not in time and events. "Is there any payment?" he went on, warming up with questions. "Well, usually I give only room and board, but, well, in your case, I guess spending money is in order." He nodded. "Where's my bed?" he queried, looking up at a big, stopped grandfather clock. Down the hall, but it's in the same room next to mine, you see," I studied him. "In case I die in the night, you see," I joked, "I would want you to put some pennies on my eyelids." He sort of grinned. "My name, by the way," he offered his hand, "is Daventry." "And where'd you run off from, Daventry?" I inquired, and then put my hand gentle over his mouth and said, "Don't answer that one." He complained about all the birds making so much noise in the morning he couldn't sleep. Or maybe complain is not even the word, but comment. And then he said he had never seen so many books in a house. There were more books than wallpaper, furniture, pictures, or proper rugs, I told him. The books was not mine. In the winter, I went to his first point of criticism. The birds, for the most part, are quiet. Oh, a few chickadees scold and call and crow here, and there are caws, of course. But until you spoke of it, I guess I hadn't any note of the fuss the birds do make in the morning. Now, you come from Utah, Daventry. That is Plains, isn't it? He nodded, as he went from one shelf after another, taking the books down, blowing off the settled dust, staring at a page here, another page there. Meanwhile, I was holding my breath, trying to work myself up to having him take his first letter to deliver to Widow Rance. I wondered if he would do, for with all the interviewing of applicants I had done, and with none of them panning out, this one didn't work out, I would have to fall back on Quintus, for I couldn't go on seeing all these young men forever, picking and choosing and being disappointed. But speaking of Quintus, as I sat there in the study, I suddenly thought of the word for him. He was sober. Maybe not too sober, but sober. I don't mean in regard to not drinking. I don't dare drink myself on account of my veins and arteries being all but murdered. But Quintus, when you got right down to it, didn't approve of anything but doing chores for his ma and watching the chickens grow up. Too perfect, Quintus. He made me feel no account. Still, if this Daventry doesn't pan, I thought, I will have to have Quintus forever on account of I can't keep on interviewing the whole world. Oh, Jesus Christ, I let slip out. And he said immediately, "What's wrong with you now?" Nothing. Can't I sigh if I want to? He began looking at me from that moment more and more straight in the face without so much as batting an eye. How'd you sleep last night, Daventry? I slept good. I don't snore or anything, do I? I didn't hear you. I was looking through an old book on Arabia, trying to get my inspiration up to pen, or rather dictate a letter to Daventry for the widow Rance. My own hands will barely hold a pen anyhow, and for some time now, if they don't hold anything too long, all the flesh will come off clear to the bone. Are you ready, Daventry? I spoke in my most quavering voice, and I jumped up from my chair and went and stood in the middle of the room ready to dictate. And I always felt like the leading baritone in the church choir when I'd done that, but instead of music, of course, it was just letters that came out. And this leads me to a remark he made right at the first, and shows how he was, for I had begun the letter like this. My precious dear, I am sending you a courtly young man named Daventry. I will not say he was angered by this sentence, but I could see he had been troubled by something about me from the start. Not my nauseous appearance, though, as I will never want to fail to emphasize, at night or in dim house light, I am still not a million miles away from what I was when the high school girls mooned over me, but by what I spoke. So there he was, the new applicant, making a little speech, which began something like this. Where do you get all these odd expressions, Garnet? He began talking to me from as familiar as if he had known me all my days. For I've never heard anybody talk like you, and I don't think anybody does talk like you. Like the word courtly young man. He swept right along. He stood there now like a judge, behind a bench awaiting for my defense. As I was saying, Daventry, I began in the greatest confusion at his charge. Not knowing I talked any different from anybody when we talked earlier, not seeing many persons but the applicant, and people not liking to talk to me since I was blowed up for dead, and my buddies all killed, and parts of my body's blown all over me, buried under them for some days, as you know, before I was found. I go off on this speech every so often when I know I should follow doctor's orders and just forget. You know, well, of course, in the beginning, I spoke like all Virginia boys do, and that is a good speech. But when I fell in love all over again with Widow Rance and had nothing anyhow to do but read these books, which I will be the first to say I don't understand a jot or tittle of, but all the same, I have become habituated to reading these hard tomes I can't understand. For instance, I don't take any pleasure anymore in reading the newspaper, and anyhow, they are all about the living Daventry and written living language. No, I have got firmly habituated to these old books, like this thick one I hear about Arabia, nearly 200 years old, and so gradually, you see, these old books have seeped or trickled into my speech and have took over, maybe, from the way people talk today. But you, until you spoke just now, I didn't know I had this peculiarity even, so that explains how I'd call you a courtly young man. Dig? Daventry shook his head slowly again, like the old half-broken pendulum of the clock when I'm dickering with it. So I talk now the way it gives me pleasure, I went on, somewhat offended at his criticism. If you don't understand anything I said, I appealed to his forbearance, ask me, and I will try to explain it then. Although the Sunday school superintendent, when he was here, up a year ago or so, said I didn't know how to use any of the words right, I do pick from the old tomes, though he was half joking and you are serious. Oh, back now to the Widow Rance. Just 1 second, though, Garnet, he began again. If you don't mind, what do I do now if say, the Widow Rance, as you call her, I guess he felt this way of speaking of her was queer. What if she don't want me to deliver these letters? I mean, you said something kind of suspicious about her maybe not wanting you to write them. To tell the truth, I took up his point. She doesn't want me to write letters. I got somewhat sheepish now. But the preacher, my voice got persuasive, talked to her about it, and, well, hell, to tell you the truth, it's charity. Charity? Yes, goddammit. In the old days, I would have flushed an angry beet red having to eat humble pie like this in front of another man and admit to groveling, but being so discolored, I don't suppose if I did flush, it would be visible. For instance, I can't bear to study myself in the mirror unless all the lights are out, except for a teeny candle. Then in the darkness and teeny illuminations, I sometimes look at myself in a bowl of water, and is what I see sad? Well, I don't be downhearted, I returned to Daventry. She will receive you, if not with open arms, as a respected messenger, if not a guest. And again he shook his head, but he had the sheepish, he had the freshly sharpened pencil ready and was beginning to go. Dearest, only dear, I began all over again. I'm getting on better now and have some adjustments. And some adjustments are being made. I have goats now, which are mine from the death of Mr. Patterson, brought by Quintus, who, by the way, I thought of having as an applicant, and I believe he will look in on me from time to time. But, dear lady, this letter is to introduce you to Daventry. He's from the grazing lands of Utah, and will be attending me as an applicant. I believe him and me will get along, and I would like to have you trust him also. Never fear. I will never again intrude myself on your presence, and remember, there is nothing on or about my persons which can bring disease or other complications, because the army docs assured me, without quite swearing on the Bible, I am absolutely sterilized from any Indochina germs. So be of good cheer, and know that I love you more than life. Your servant, Garnet. I've been out studying his face whilst I was dictating, because the effort and pain of expressing my thoughts had taken all my attention and strength. But when I looked down at him from my 6'4", I was struck with amazement at his expression. He was looking at me with a kind of sick awe, certainly with amazed wonder. "What is it, Daventry?" I inquired. "Nothing, Garnet." "Yes, there is something. You think I'm crazy, don't you?" "No, I don't," Daventry countered. "I don't think that." "Well, I just wonder at it all." He spoke after a while in a whisper. Then all of a sudden he swatted a daytime mosquito that had settled on his cheek, and having swatted it, his cheek was all covered with blood, for it must have been biting us all night. I walked over to him, and almost without thinking I was doing it, took out a clean pocket handkerchief and wiped the blood from his face. He looked at me with more wonder. "Now, Daventry," I went on, "we sealed this letter just as though it was going through the U.S. mails, and you walked a mile and a half or so down the back road and put it in her hands." "With pleasure," he said, jumping up like he was coming to from a nap, and took the letter from my loose hands. When he was gone, I put my face to the wall and began to bawl. "He pities me, God damn it," I said. "That's what that look meant. God damn it, and him, I won't have it. I won't have the motherfucker pity me." And at the same time, I was celestially happy at the look he had given me. It was the first time for, I don't know when, that somebody had looked at me like I was another man. A little nauseated, sure, but still like he'd seen me as I was. And here I was, too, almost shedding tears for the first time in so long, after writing down those slips of paper that I could not cry. Well, it was mostly bawling. Not real tears come out from my lacrimal glands, but some did. A milestone.